Okay, so let me go ahead and hide the little floaty thing. So how do we protect ourselves, right? The essence and the avenue as we go through the trenches, right? Because no one wants to get in trouble, right? At the end of the day. So here's where agents get themselves in a pickle, right? Missing deadlines, failure to monitor the contingencies. You know how many times I've been in situations where agents are not keeping track of the contingencies, where the buyer was supposed to release their loan and all contingencies 2 weeks ago, and no one has done anything because you're not keeping track of these parameters in place. Incorrect assumptions about the automatic removal of contingencies, poor communications with escrow and the lender, right? Especially if you're working with the buyer. It's your job, it's your duty, and it's your responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to be able to be in constant communications with all parties, including the real estate agent that's representing the seller, the lender, the escrow, and more so your clients as well, right? Uh, and then no documentations trail, right? Most agents obviously have a system in place to be able to know how to navigate that to the finish line, right? Most real estate disputes are not caused by bad people. They are caused by missed timelines and poor communications. And what happens is your clients get upset, your sellers, your buyers. Hey, what's going on? Why did the deal fall apart, right? Could you have prevented something like that? And the answer is most times, yes. Most times, yes, right? Timeline creates leverage, timeline creates cancellation rights, and then timeline creates liability exposures, right? So if a buyer wants to exit out of a deal, right, knowing and understanding the timelines will be an advantage, right? Or vice versa. The seller's like, you know what? The buyer hasn't been able to perform based on the timelines. We need to send a notice to perform. And if they don't perform, then we have the right to cancel, right? Because we may have a buyer that is offering better price terms and conditions, right? But you just cannot unilaterally just cancel because you want to cancel. You have to follow the protocol and the procedure, right? So understand those positions, right? So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about calendar days versus business days. Does anyone know the distinctions between calendar and business days? All right, tell me.
It's included even Saturday and Sunday, but
Yeah.
business day is only Monday to Friday.
Wonderful. All right, let's give her a round of applause. Yes, I love that. Absolutely. Yes,
We
yes,
couldn't
yes,
hear
yes.
her. Simon, we
Yeah,
didn't hear her.
what's that?
We did not hear her.
Oh, okay. That's funny because the mic is right here. All right, repeat the question one more time. So, what is the difference between calendar days and business days?
Okay, calendar days are from Monday through Saturday and Sunday. So all 7 days are included. Business days are from Monday through Friday. That's it.
Yeah. So the distinguish between business days is like she says, business days are Monday to Friday, right? That's usually operations, right? Calendar days is, 1 to 30 days, right? Those are calendar days. So the calendar days defaults from most contingencies. Weekends and holidays also count as well as part of the calendar days because I get this quite often as well. Hey, Simon, question for you. If we're on a 30-day escrow, right, and they're supposed to release all contingencies within 17 days, right? Does that mean that we skip the weekends, right? Because those are not considered business days, right? No, that's not the way the contract works. The way the contract works, ladies and gentlemen, is calendar days. So 17 days from the time of acceptance starts the timeline for the buyer to release a or all contingencies. Okay. Whereas business days is only applies when the contract specifically states and used for deposits, such as your 3 business days, right? So you have to understand the distinguishes between calendar days. Calendar is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or business days may be just Monday to Friday, and that could be within a day or two, right? And then we'll go over also what if the contingency falls on a weekend or a holiday, right? So I'll explain kind of also the elements of that as well.
Hey,
An
Simon.
offer accepted on Friday. One second. An offer accepted on Friday evening. Deposit is due Wednesday. 17-day inspection contingency removal lands on the Monday of the following week. So that's kind of what the position is, that as long as it falls on a weekday or a business day, right, then you should be able to release that specific contingency. Someone had a question?
Yeah, Simon, I did. I just went to the Matrix training, and they said that it's a 6 business day week, Monday through Saturday. Does that apply to something else?
I think that applies to something else. Yeah, because 6 days would put you on a Saturday, which is a weekend. That is not considered a business day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is considered a business day. So I'm not sure if we're talking about something totally different, but the 6th day is not considered a business day. It's considered a calendar day, and it incorporates a position when we are submitting an offer for a 30-day or a 20-day escrow, right? That's 20 calendar days. But if a contingency ends up falling into a weekend or a holiday, right, then ultimately it reverts to the next business day or next calendar day that is not a weekend or a holiday. For example, we just had, what was the most recent holiday we had? Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Right. That hit on the 19th. It was a Friday. That's a national holiday. So let's just say that a contingency, 17 days, happens to fall on that date. Right. Well, Simon, that's a Friday. You just said it's a business day, right? But it's a national holiday. So what happens is now that 17-day can be now extended, not Saturday, not Sunday, but Monday to perform. Okay. So now from a 17-day, it's 18, 19. So technically they have about 20 days to release. That's a plus. That's a definitely a plus for the buyer, because it gives them extra time to release that specific contingency. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But on a regular Friday, then that's when the buyer needs to perform. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions regarding calendar days and business days? Okay. Let's continue. So let's go kind of a transaction timeline map, right? So the offer is accepted, right? So let's say that you're in negotiations with the listing agent, right? And you go back and forth, back and forth. You submitted an offer on Monday, but your negotiations and seller buyer counter offers, and ultimately your offer does get executed, say on Thursday, right? So that would be considered an acceptance. The minute that both mutual buyer and seller sign the offer, or any buyer counter, seller counter, multiple counter offer, once it's completely executed, that's when you can consider the acceptance. Okay. So let's say, theoretically speaking, if we have a 30-day escrow and you submitted the offer on Monday, now is Monday start your 30-day escrow period? How many say yes? How many say no? How many say I'm not sure? Okay. Got it. Okay, so the answer is no. Just because you submitted an offer doesn't start the timelines. Okay. It's when it was accepted. And let's say that the acceptance was yesterday, Thursday, then that starts the calendar of events, right? Now, keep also in mind that Thursday is still considered a 0 day because we don't know when that offer was accepted by the seller. It could be accepted at 7 in the morning, or it can be accepted at 7 p.m. in the afternoon or evening. So that's why that day is considered a 0 day. Okay. And I want to make sure we're clear because I get that confusion. Simon, we got the offer accepted. Is that one day of a 30-day escrow? And the answer is no. That's considered 0 days. So then the following day starts your one day of a 30-day process. So that way you have exactly 12 or 24-hour period to start, right? So it gives the buyer the time necessary to perform and do what they need to do: inspections, appraisal, get the loan approval, right? Negotiate back and forth, request the repairs, right? Making sure that everything is in alignment so that way the time necessary to perform is done, right? So now let's talk about the timelines, right? So the offer gets accepted. Now, I also want you to understand the distinguishes and the difference between DAA and DBC, okay? So DAA stands for days after acceptance, and DBC stands for days before closing. And the reason I want to bring this to your attention because this will give you kind of a trajectory and kind of a process is, where am I in this initial process, right? So the 3 DAA, which is days after acceptance, right? Your offer gets accepted, right? The contract says that the buyer has 3 days to deposit their earnest deposit into escrow. So let's kind of do the math here. If your offer got accepted yesterday, Thursday, when is the buyer supposed to put in the earnest deposit? If the offer was accepted on
3 days.
Thursday, yes, it is 3 days. Okay, so if that's the case, when is the deposit supposed to be done?
By
Okay, so
Monday,
Tuesday.
the next day. Okay, Monday or Tuesday.
okay, I'm glad I'm having this conversation, right? Yeah, it's 3 business days, right? So think about it for a quick minute. Okay, so this is where it gets a little tricky. Okay, because the contract is very defined of what it says. It says 3 business days, not calendar days, ladies and gentlemen. So if you think about it for a minute, is okay, offer got accepted on Thursday. Now Thursday is 0 days. Friday is 1 day. Friday is also a business day. Saturday and Sunday is a weekend. Monday would be considered 2 business days. So technically speaking, they would have till Tuesday to put in the deposit. And I can argue with any agent and win that argument because it's business days. Well, Simon, wait a minute. We were talking about calendar days. Calendar days, if you say Thursday is 0, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. What escrow company is open on Sunday? You let me know because I'll go there. I'm kidding. Right? But that's the functions of it, right? Some will argue, well, wait a minute, then that means Monday. Why can't they put the deposit? Well, maybe they're pulling the money from different resources, right? Not just one bank account. Maybe they're going into their Roth and maybe retirement, their pensions. Maybe they're gifting some money and they need additional time, right? So for this example, ladies and gentlemen, it would be technically Tuesday to deliver the deposit, right? Seller disclosures are due. And again, it's 7 days after acceptance, right? So let's kind of do the math there, right? If we wanted to kind of argue the fact and navigate it, if it's 7 days after acceptance, now is that considered 7 business days or 7 calendar days? How many say calendar days? How many say business days? How many say I don't know? Yes. Oh, okay. All right. So on this one, it's considered calendar days. Calendar days. So let's do the math here. So if the offer was accepted on Thursday, Friday would be
Thursday,
first day, Saturday would be
second,
Sunday,
third,
Monday,
fourth,
Tuesday,
fifth,
okay, Wednesday,
sixth,
and then Thursday would be 7 calendar days, right? So the seller will need till Thursday to provide seller disclosures to the buyer. Okay. So what happens if the seller doesn't provide the seller disclosures by Thursday? What can the buyer do?
Back out.
Remain. Then
Okay, there's a couple of things they can do, right? One, not necessarily back out just yet, but what they can do is send a notice to perform.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, we haven't received disclosures based on the timelines. It says here that you have 7 days to provide me with all the seller disclosures. This is why it's crucial and vital that you work with the transaction coordinator, because the TC will keep you on track. Because agents are agents. You know, we focus on other stuff. We don't focus on timelines. I know that for personal reasons, because I know how agents work. So in essence the notice to perform has to be given to the seller. And if the seller does not perform within the timeline, which again, it's 48 hours for the notice to perform. So if you send the notice to perform on Thursday, which is 7 days, what does that mean to the seller? How much time does the seller have from that time frame to release the disclosures to the
2
buyer?
days.
2 days? Okay, 48 hours. So then that gives the seller how much time? So if it's Thursday was 7 days and you send the notice to perform on Thursday, Thursday is considered what? 0 days. 0 days, right? So it doesn't count as 2 days. That's why it's confusing, ladies and gentlemen. I want to make sure we're clear. If a notice of perform was sent on Thursday, that's considered 0 days. So then Friday would be 1. And then Saturday would be the second. So because it falls on a weekend, I'm going to confuse you again. Does that mean that the seller's disclosures get pushed to Monday, the next business days? That's correct. Good job. The answer is no. Okay, because that has nothing to do with contingencies. It has to do with disclosures, which is a whole different parameter in place. So yes, if the seller does not perform and provide the seller disclosures by at least Saturday, now the contract also says time. So the time that the seller has to perform, because I get this quite often as well. Well, Simon, what time on Saturday can we cancel if the seller doesn't give us the disclosures? Well, look at what the contract says. And under definition, I think it's paragraph 29 of the purchase agreement, it says the following. It says that the seller or the buyer has till 11:59 p.m. to perform. 11:59 p.m. to perform. Okay. So that means they have pretty much all day to give you the disclosures. So if they give you all disclosures at exactly 11:59 p.m., are they good? They're pretty much good. Yeah. So they've performed, right? So, but if they don't, then the buyer has the right to exercise the cancellation of this and back out and then ultimately retain their full deposit because the seller did not perform. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the rest of the contingencies, right? Like a loan, made of could be, that they said instead of 17 days, we can do 15. That's the beautiful thing about contingencies and negotiations. Okay, just because it defaults to 17 days to release contingencies doesn't mean that the seller and the buyer have to agree to 17 days. The seller can send a counteroffer, says, look, I'm not going to do 17 days, but I'll give you 15 days to perform and to release that contingencies, right? Because it's already defaulted into contingency removal 17 days. That's releasing the seller, disclosures, appraisal, physical inspections, seller disclosures. I think I said that, and then loan contingency is part of it as well. And when you release any and all, that includes if there's HOA, city permits, and all of that, that the buyer has fully satisfied with the overall condition of the property and they're continuing to move forward with it, right? So that's kind of the distinguishes. All right, let's kind of talk into like the request of repairs, right? Because the request of repairs says days before closing, right? So request of repairs, you cannot do it anytime after you close the deal, right? It has to be within the escrow period, right? So this is why, again, it's vital and important for all of you to understand how to navigate this, right? Because let's say that the seller and the buyer agree to request the repairs to be released 17 days. And then on the 16th day, right, you're barely doing your inspections. And now you're sending the seller a request of repairs that day or the following day, which is the 17th day. What happens next? Okay. The buyer has waited till the very end when they know that 17-day is the crucial timeline to release that physical inspection contingency. And now you're barely sending a request of repairs to the seller. What can happen there? Okay. You don't want to wait till that very end, right? This is why we say as soon as your offer gets accepted, you as the agent and you as your buyer, you got to guide them and says, let's get going with all of the inspections that you want. Don't be the agent that waits to the very end of the contingency period to start doing this. One, all properties are sold in as is condition, meaning that the seller doesn't have to entertain anything that the buyer requests. Okay, they can send a laundry of list of items that the buyer wants repaired, fixed, credit, or a price reduction, right? But under no circumstances does the seller have to do so. They do it in good faith to work with the buyer because they're flexible and they want the deal to continue. Because when you do a hard stop and the seller says, nope, property sold in as-is condition, and the buyer is freaking out because there's a lot of issues with the property, they may consider to back out of the deal. So for us as real estate professionals, we need to know how to navigate that and make it a win-win for all parties, right? So don't be that agent that waits to the very end because, again, the seller doesn't even have to respond. I get a lot of complaints. Simon, hey, I sent a request of repairs, but it's been radio silence from the seller or the listing agent. We haven't got any response. Okay. Well, did you call the agent? No. Did you text the agent? No. So then how do you expect to know? Maybe the agent never received your request of repairs. So keep in mind, folks, call. As soon as you send a request of repairs, right, asking for any type of concessions from the seller, follow up with a call. Hey, this is Simon over at Keller Williams. I just wanted to let you know that I sent you a request of repairs. Please let me know if your seller will consider any of those terms. Let me know as soon as possible. Listing agent receives and acknowledge received. All right. So we know exactly that they got it. And then do a follow-up. Okay. Don't rely on the listing agent to follow up with you. Be proactive and engage and follow up, because if you know that time of the essence and contingencies are coming close to be released, you need to call and find out, hey, any update from the seller? No update as of yet. Is the seller planning to respond to any of our requests? Yeah, they've been out of town, they've been working, this and that, but we'll get back to you. Okay, well, at least you have some dialogue that, there may be some response to the buyer's request, right? Because if you don't, the listing agent can send you a notice to perform and release contingencies, but the buyer says, well, they didn't even consider any of my repair requests. Well, again, property sold in its as-is condition, right? So be mindful of it as you're going through the elements of a transaction, right? Because it could happen. And I know there's stubborn sellers out there that won't do anything. You're buying the property the way it is. You take it or leave it. If you don't like it, bye-bye. Okay, I'll go find another buyer. Okay, and that's okay. So this is why you need to educate your buyers and understand how the process works. All right, so with offer obligations and pre-approval standards, right? So buyer pre-approval letter, DU, which stands for desk underwriting, LP automatic approval, right, which is kind of loan processing, and proof of funds, fully underwritten approval. Okay. So part of the initial process when you submit your offer is how detailed are you, right? Because I think, and this is my belief, the more you have your resume, because it's a resume, right? You're presenting your client's offer like you would present a good resume for employment, right? So the more detailed, the more professional, the more that you involve the ends of your buyer's position, the likelihood that the listing agent and the seller are going to consider your offer over others, right? So did you prepare the offer? Did you check for any errors and mistakes? Is it completed, right? Did you get all of the signatures? Did you include a pre-approval or a pre-qualified letter? Do you have proof of funds, right? Anything that shows that they're going cash or they're going with a down payment, right? Proof of funds. Has it already gone through an underwriter process? Okay. And instead of just a surface where they just check your credit score and didn't go through the heavy of submitting everything, tax returns, bank statements, credit scores, right? And then it got sent over to the underwriter and they gave you the blessings. That's good. That's a solid buyer. That means that you've done pretty much a lot of legwork up front that you should be able to close even sooner than a 30-day period, right? Whereas not all pre-approvals are equal, right? Weak lender letters, right? Fake or unveiled proof of funds. I've seen so many things that are like, I don't know if this is a good proof of fund, right? If you're saying you're putting a 20%, right? And when they send over the proof of funds, but that 20% is 300,000 as an example, but they only have $100,000 as proof of funds, there's a discrepancy here, right? There's something that I'm not 100% sure is where is the rest of the proof here? Okay, maybe I wouldn't consider, accepting that offer, right? And this is why you have to educate your sellers. This is what we have. Here's the offer, but we're still missing, the remainder of that $300,000 as they're saying they're putting 20% down, right? So be mindful of that, but also ask a lot of questions. And immediately, hey, thank you again for submitting your offer. We've received it, but I do have a couple questions and I need clarity. One is you submitted an offer with 20% down payment, but when you send me the proof of funds, I only see a bank statement or some type of amount that only reflects $100,000. Now I'm doing the math, and the math says based on this, it should equal this. I only have 100,000. What am I missing? Oh, my sincere apologies. I should have sent you the other proof of funds. Let me go ahead and email it to you. and immediately they have another $500,000 in a different account. Now it makes sense. Okay. So this is why you need to ask a lot of questions, right? Verify lender credentials and letter quality before accepting offers, right? You can also speak with the lender as a listing agent, right? If you receive an offer, you have every right, ladies and gentlemen, to speak with the lender, okay, and ask questions. How solid are these buyers, right? Do you foresee any issues, right? Is everything in alignment that we're not going to have any delays, right? That's where you can come in proactively and engage in those conversations with the lender as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit of the 3 days after acceptance, right? So buyer's deposit, 3 business days delivered directly to escrow, which we already acknowledged, right? Most buyers, because they're so excited, right, they'll immediately put the money within a day or two. But what happens is if the buyer is running out of time, you represent the buyer, you're now in crunch time, and now you're pushing 2 days, but you know that the buyer's deposit is not going to come in immediately. What can the buyer and the buyer agent do if they need more time? Let's say they need an additional 2 days or 3 days, which surpasses the 3 days, but they need 2 more days. What can the buyer do? Yeah, they can request an extension of time to deliver the deposit to escrow. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, you got to be proactive, right? And what I mean by that is if you know the buyer's not going to be able to bring in the money within that 3 business days, then you need to engage in the conversation with the listing agent. Says, hey, again, this is Simon with Keller Williams. Hey, we're super excited about opening escrow. Buyers are excited, but we came to a little bit of a roadblock and a little bit of a dilemma. Unfortunately, the deposit that they thought they were going to have don't have it yet, and we're asking for additional time because we don't want to be what do you call it, in the back end, waiting for the seller to put us in a position to perform, right? Because then we may lose the leverage and the opportunity for us to get the offer to where we need to the finish line. They may decide to cancel. So when you're the buyer's agent, call and says, we need extra time. We're going to send you the modification. We're only asking for 2 additional times. So what should have been a 3-day to deposit the earnest deposit into escrow now is 5 days because you're asking 2 additional days, which is fine. Look, I'm not going to put a negative thing on it. Listen, as long as you're communicating with me, I want to work with you. I don't want to start over again. So I'll have the seller bend a little bit because there's been communication throughout the initial process. I like someone that's communicating with me and at least giving me updated information. I don't like when someone is not communicating with me. And then when I call, text, and email, I don't even get a response. That's already putting me in a position of having a bad taste, right? What's this issue? Is the agent super busy, or is the agent just not proactive, right? Or is the agent have so many other personal stuff that's happening and cannot take care of his obligations? Who knows, right? But that's where communication is vital, folks. Very vital, right? Pick up the phone and call. If you know you're not going to be late on depositing something or sending something, be proactive in that engagement. The representative capacity, right? Confirm if your client is going to be part of a trust, part of a limited liability company, a probate or corporation, right? That is involved in this particular transaction, right? And for the most part, most agents understand that if a corporation or an entity other than you is usually submitted, right? But last minute, there might be some changes, right? Make sure that you're in alignment and that everyone's on the same page. This is where you need to communicate with your clients. Are you buying it as your own personal, or are you buying it under your corporation or your trust? Okay, so be mindful of that. HOA requests. Seller must request documents and pay upfront fees immediately. Delays can cause problems, right? So if you're now on the listing side of it, and your client has a condominium or a townhome that has HOA, remember, not all HOAs work the same. There's some great HOAs and there's some horrible HOA. So time of the essence, right? Because if you do not provide the necessary documentation on a timely manner, what's going to happen is it's going to put the buyer in a position that they have additional time to review. And if they buy or release all contingency and last minute you provide HOA documentation, they have additional 5 days to review, inspect, and determine if they want to continue or not. And if they don't, and they decide to cancel, the seller has no position to really argue over the earnest deposit because, one, we failed to provide that in a timely manner, and this is now considered new material facts about the condominium. Common problems that happen are buyers never wire funds. Agents assume lenders handle it. Well, that's not the case, right? Escrow still will be waiting for the instructions. Remember, escrow is a neutral party, right? Their job is just to get instructions from two parties, the buyer and the seller. But it's your job to guide your clients and ask the clients, hey, look, congratulations, your offer was accepted. You have 3 business days to deposit the money into escrow. Please connect with the escrow company. Here's the escrow officer, and let us know once you have that confirmation. Look, escrow companies are really good as well. They'll send us a receipt reminder or an email saying, hey, we received the buyer's deposit. Here's the receipt of it, right? So then it means that the buyer is ready. We're moving forward with the initial process. Always confirm deposit receipts directly with escrow and get it in writing, right? And for most part, our escrow company is on it as soon as we receive the deposit, and the email is sent out to everyone, and then we're good. All right, 7 days after acceptance, seller disclosures obligations. This is, again, days after acceptance, right? We talked about this. The offer gets accepted, and now the timelines start ticking, right? So this is where the seller needs to make sure that they're on it, right? Don't be that agent. And when I say don't be that agent, from the seller's point of view, that wait till the very last minute to get the seller to start doing all of the disclosures. Okay, here's the way I would approach it. And this is just my way, right? As soon as you get the listing, right? As soon as you get the listing, part of that initial process should be that the seller also should start filling out all of the seller obligations and disclosures. That way, when you go live on the market, right, you don't have to worry about this because that's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of information on seller disclosures. And the whole point and purpose of all of this, ladies and gentlemen, is to disclose any concerns regarding the overall condition of the property. If we know the house has a lot of bad things with it, right? Plumbing, electrical, roof, foundation, it doesn't really matter, right? But as long as the seller provides what they know about the property, the history, then we're good, we're covered. The buyer cannot come back and say, you failed to disclose that the plumbing was bad, right? Well, the buyer has their due diligence to do any and all inspections, right? But also our job is that if we know, we disclose. If they tell us and we know, we disclose. It's a protection for you and it's a protection for the seller. This is where we see most of the lawsuits, litigations happen is for non-disclosure issues because the buyer believes that the seller knew about it but hid it from the buyer. So be mindful is that happens quite often. This is why you want to cover your bases, and this is why you need to educate the seller to disclose. Even if it's something this tiny, disclose, 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 okay? Failure to disclose will compromise everyone, and now you're dragged into a litigation, and now you have to deal with protecting yourself, okay? Even though you may not be involved in that, but you're representing the seller, and they're going to try to throw everyone into this chaos, right? So be mindful, protect yourself, and educate the seller. disclose everything. Okay, I'll share a quick story. Okay, many years ago, one of our agents represented a client, and the client had a beautiful house. The client had a 1 acre property, but the property was in a ravine. Okay, it was on a hillside, and there was I believe in a gated community, there was only 100 properties in that little community, and each of the property had a 1 acre lot. But this particular property had a view of the valley, and the house sat on a beautiful. I think it was like maybe 3,000 square feet was the property, flat, and then it would go down, and then it would go up this hill, and then you can see the other property way up in the hill. Well, this particular seller had lived there for many, many years and would use the backyard as a golf range. So every time he would hit those balls and whack it, and the ball would go out because there was no properties behind him. The closest house was way up on the very top. Okay. So when the agent picked up the listing agent reached out to me and said to me, "Hey, I'm just wondering. The seller told me about whacking golf balls, and to my surprise, when I looked, there was literally thousands of golf balls out there. Is that something that the seller needs to disclose to the buyer?" And I said, "Yeah." He said it just doesn't seem relevant. No one is behind there. No one knows about it. No one goes there, but it just hits the balls because it was just a ravine and it was a mountain hill. That was it. Okay. There was no houses anywhere next to the property, and that's where he would hit those golf balls. So I says, look at the bigger picture, right? Let's just say, God forbid, you or the seller do not disclose that, right? Buyer moves into the property, and one late evening, right? It's pitch dark. One of the homeowners decides to go down and start walking, and then ultimately steps on one of those golf balls, and then loses his balance, rolls down, and gets paralyzed. And then the following day, when they look, oh my God, look at all of the thousands and thousands of golf balls. Because the guy lived there for 25 years and he was an avid golf player. But he would use his backyard for range to smack the balls. And I says, look, you never know. And then when that was explained that way, the seller and the agent understood. Yeah, we don't want to come back and say, they never disclosed that there was all these golf balls back there. And now,
did they word that?
Yeah, it was, I don't remember the wording, but basically, yeah, I don't remember the wording, but just to that extent, that the seller is divulging and disclosing that the backyard is used as a golf range, and there may be thousands of golf balls in the backyard. Buyer to do their due diligence. And yeah, you know what? The buyers were obviously grateful about it. One, they could have got their sons to start picking all those golf balls. You don't know. But the good thing is that it was divulged and disclosed, right? And that's the key is, it may be something small or something big. It's best to just disclose and let the buyer do their due diligence, because now they can't come back and say, you failed to tell me, right? That's where you get a potential claim against you. TDS, SPQ, Abbott's natural hazard disclosures, HOAs, preliminary title reports, and then your FERPA disclosures, right? Late disclosures resets buyer's investigation, and it really does. Not to the extent is like, does it reset the seller? Because if the seller knew about it, they should have disclosed it as part of the package. That way there's no delays, because that can harm and delay the process from closing on time as well. Does that make sense? All right. So scenarios that reopen rights, solar discovery, unpermitted additions, insurance issues found after contingency removals, right? So I see this quite often too right now with solars, right? Things that are leased, right? And sellers think that it was paid off, right? And in essence, it wasn't, right? So this is where you have to be mindful, ask a lot of questions so that way you're educated. And now you know proactively, hey, we need to make sure that that gets transferred, right? Because it can open up a can of worms as well. Incomplete or vague TDS response, especially unknown or unaware, creates liability, right? Because a lot of people just, for the sake of laziness, they'll just say nothing to report, nothing to advise to the buyer, right? The little things to the big things. This is where you need to make sure your clients know the importance, because all we're doing is trying to protect them from a liability. Okay. I know there's some questions, I believe, on the chat, but I'll answer those in a bit. All right, the big one is the 17-day contingencies, right? So this is the 17-day DAA, right? Days after acceptance, right? So remember, 17 days is calendar days, right? And when that time comes, the listing agent will be sending you a notice to perform if you're not proactive. Now, the contract says the following. It says that the buyer must release that as part of the contingency. Most buyers and most buyers agents won't. They'll wait until they get a notice to perform, because remember, I've explained it in so many different classes that the earnest deposit and the contingencies is like a layer of a wall. Every layer that you remove or every wall that you remove allows the seller closer and closer and closer to the buyer's deposit. As soon as the buyer releases any and all contingencies, then that's it. They expose the buyer's deposit, and if the buyer doesn't perform or close the deal, the seller has rights to the earnest deposit, right? So in essence, this is the biggest one, in my opinion, is depending on what you agree to, contingencies do not automatically get removed. Okay. So just because the day happens and now it's day 18th or 19th doesn't mean, oh, it's past the 17 days, so it's automatically released. No, that's not the way it works. There's a proper form, and that proper form is a CR form, the contingency removal, that's your receipt. That's your proof. Okay. I'll give you an example. How many people have been in an amusement park? Okay. And are you allowed to go in without some type of proof that you paid admissions? No, right?
No.
But let's just say halfway through the amusement park, you decide to get out of the amusement park because you needed to do something, but you plan to come back. Okay. So, in essence, you need some type of proof or receipt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most amusement park will ask you before you leave, hey, are you planning to come back? And if that's the case, they usually put you a stamp, right? And that's your proof saying, hey, I was here today, but I plan to come back. And that can be in a couple hours or a few minutes. It doesn't matter. But they'll usually stamp you with the proof of receipt that you were here and you're just coming back. So when you do decide to come back, you just have to do this. I'm returning back to the park. And they'll say, okay, come on in. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to contingencies. Your receipt is the contingency removal, ladies and gentlemen. So without the contingency removal, the buyer can argue the fact, well, I never released contingencies. So therefore, I still have my right to my deposit. And you know how many times I've been in a situation where agents fail to get the contingency removal, and now the buyer's backing out of the deal, and now the buyer's asking for their full deposit. So be mindful and careful. Press on it, especially if you're the listing agent asking the buyer's agent and the buyer to release contingency. Send that notice to perform, or call the agent and say, hey, we haven't received that contingency. Can you please send it over? Buyer confirms, signs off on the specific contingency, and there's your proof, right? So all you're doing is protecting your client's best interests. So contingency covered: inspections, loan appraisal, title review, disclosure reviews. What must happen, right? Buyer must actively remove it in writing. Seller cannot assume removal, right? It has to be signed and executed. And that's your receipt. And time passes is not a removal, right? Just because 17 came and went, and you think everything's good. No, buyer can at the last minute, and I've seen this where 30-day escrow, 28 days into escrow, buyer decides to cancel. And the buyer didn't release any contingencies. Why? It's beyond me. But the buyer has the right now to exercise the reason behind that says, I never released my contingency. So per the contract, I get my full deposit back. Okay. So passive inaction by buyer equals contingency remaining active. Seller cannot cancel without proper notice, right? So remember, how you navigate this is vital and crucial. All right, contingency removal is a kind of a strategy, right? So the mechanics of it, right? 17-day passes, seller issues a notice to perform, buyer gets 2 days to respond. Remember, we talked about all this, and then the seller may cancel, right? If the buyer doesn't perform within those 2 days. Now, one thing that I did not share with you is, and I wanted to kind of get a poll on this. If you know that a contingency is to be removed on the 17th day, can the listing agent and the seller send you the notice to perform 2 days prior to that contingency removal? How many say yes? How many say no? How many say I don't know? Remember, 17 days, but you're sending a notice 2 days prior to that release. Okay. The answer is yes, you can.
Yeah.
You can send a notice to perform within 2 days prior. Because what happens here, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you send it 2 days prior, then on the 17th day at 11:59 p.m., if the buyer doesn't perform, you have the right to cancel with the buyer. Whereas you wait till the 17th day to give notice, now they have 18, 19 days. Well, the contract says 17 days, but because you send the notice to perform on the 17th day, it gives the buyer 2 additional days, especially if you want to quickly cancel with someone because you may have a backup offer that's better. You don't want to wait to the 17 days. You want to try to see if the buyer performs, and if they don't, cancel. So the answer is yes, you can send. Now, can you send it 72 days prior? 4 days prior? No. And it says on the contract, if you read the contingency removal, that you can send it 2 days before the contingency removal. Make sense? Okay. All right, so buyer strategies: use contingency as leverage, do not remove early, preserve your exit rights, right? Now, for us real estate professionals that represent the buyer, right, one of the elements is we want to protect our buyers, right? We don't want them to release the contingency. But, you can be under the radar for a while and say, look, I'm not going to do or say anything. I'm going to see how far I can. And that may be good, especially if a listing agent is not proactive. You might be able to get away with it. But be mindful is the minute that they do decide to send you the notice to perform, now you got to let the buyer know, hey, we got to act on it, right? Now, the other question I get is, let's say that it was a 17-day to release all contingency, and now it's 22 days. And they send a notice to perform, and they put on the notice to perform. You must release it within a couple hours. Okay. Now, thinking of the contract, right? And I want you to be clear on this. You're past the 17 days. The listing agent now sends you a notice to perform. And on that notice to perform, they're saying you have 4 hours to release this contingency, or we have the right to cancel. Is the listing agent in the right and the seller in the right to do that? Anyone? Does it make sense of what I'm saying?
No.
All right. 17 days is to release the contingencies. Buyer never released. Buyer's agent didn't say anything to the listing agent. And then now it's 22 days. And now the listing agent says, oh my God, I forgot to send the notice to perform on the 17 days. Because it passed on the CR form, I'm going to say that the buyer has 4 days because they should have released it already on the 17 days. And now it's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. 5 days have passed. I need to shorten it. I'm going to give them 4 hours to perform. The question here, ladies and gentlemen, can the seller and the listing agent put a provision of 4 hours?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
How many say yes? Okay, 1. How many say no? Okay, good. The answer is no, because the contract in the very beginning says that the buyer has 48 hours. Now, the only way you can put that distinguish, ladies and gentlemen, is that during the beginning of negotiations, if you put on the counter offer that says the following, that if the buyer fails to release and a notice to perform is given, they have 4 hours from the time of that contingency removal, and that's is signed by the buyer, then the answer is yes. Now you can do a 4-hour period because the buyer agreed to those terms from the very beginning. If not, it defaults to 48 hours. So I can argue that fact that, hey, this is invalid. You're telling me that because you failed to give us the notice to perform within the 17 days, it's the 22nd, and now you're pressing 4 hours for my buyer to release it. It's not going to happen. I can argue and says, no, we have to revert what it originally says to allow us 48 hours. Okay. So again, once you understand, it's easier to negotiate and really protect your client's best interest. Do not let contingencies draft, force clarity with the notice buyer to perform, and use backup offers as leverage, right? That's why you want to have buyers ready in case this buyer doesn't perform. Escrow extensions can be negotiated, but document everything with a signed agreement. Right, so the notice to perform, your enforcement tools, right? And this is, again, both. You, as a buyer's agent, can also send the listing and the seller a notice to perform. There is 2 distinguishes, right? The notice to buyer to perform and the notice to seller to perform, NBP and NSP, right? Seller cannot cancel immediately. The notice to perform must be served first. Buyer remains minimum 2 days to cure. Delivery method, anytime matter, electronic delivery on weekends has nuisance. And then missing disclosures, incomplete repair, escrow cooperations, and failure, seller delays, buyer have enforcement rights to protect themselves, right? So again, the essence is if the seller is not performing, you as well can send the notice to perform. Let's just say, for example, hey, you know that 7 days is for seller to provide you with seller disclosures, right? And it's already 10 days, send the notice to perform because obviously the seller has breached the contract and now you're in a position to back out of the deal if the seller doesn't provide you with the disclosures. Both sides have contractual enforcement tools, know how to use them both, right? So it's not just one-sided, it's both sides as well, one or the other. Final days before closings, right? So the DBC, which is 5 days, and then the 3, right? Days before closing is what this distinguishes, right? All agreed repairs completed and documented. Buyer's final verification of condition, which is your final walkthrough, better known as the VP or the FVP now walkthrough. The demand to close. The demand to close allows 72 hours from the time of the demand to close. Now, as an example, the demand to close is only utilized on the date of close of escrow. So similar to the contingency removal, ladies and gentlemen, is the same thing as the demand to close. You can send that demand to close 3 days before the date of close. So if you know that the day of close is on the 20th, and you know that and feel that it's not going to close, but you want to back out of this deal, you can send the demand to close 3 days prior to the date of actual official closing. And if the buyer can't perform or the seller can't perform, then the buyer has the right to cancel. The beauty and the advantage of that says is that if the buyer has released all contingencies and now they found another property, it's like, yeah, you know what? I don't think we're going to close. I found another property that I like. Even though the buyer released all contingencies, send the demand to close because now the seller's in breach of the contract and the seller doesn't perform within the 3 days, buyer can cancel. Buyer has the right to their full deposit. Like, wait a minute, how can that happen? The buyer released all contingency because the buyer is not the one canceling or breaching the contract, I should say. It's the seller. And vice versa. If the buyer cannot perform and the seller wants to cancel with this buyer, move on to a new buyer or a backup offer, then they can send the demand to close. Watch for property damage before closing. So, the importance is, the final verification of walkthrough is really to make sure that the property is still in the same condition as originally submitted in an offer. Any requests of repairs that were done to the property, that the buyer has the right to go and check in and verify that it was done to their their satisfaction, as part of the initial process, right? Document every walkthrough, absorb and then put everything in writing, right? So that's the importance of having your final walkthrough. All right, so just a quick scenario, nothing really. We're going to go rapid fire on this, but buyer never removes contingencies, right? Seller wants to cancel. What steps are required before cancellation is valid, right? So the answer to this is the seller would have to send a notice to perform first, and if the buyer fails to release contingency, then the seller has the right to cancel. Has the right. It's optional. They can say, yeah, you know what, I'm not really canceling, but I'm trying to force them and push them to at least communicate with me, right? But if you're going to do something, you got to back it up as well. Number 2, seller delivers the TDS after 7 days. Buyer wants to exit the contract. Does the buyer have the right, have the investigation rights? The answer is yes. Because remember, if a TDS was provided 7 days after, right, that's the 7 days is the target mark. Now the buyer has their due diligence to do an additional inspection, review anything that transfer disclosure statement says, and if they're not happy with what it shows, that's their exit. They can cancel and back out of the deal. Number 3, loan not approved by 17 days. Buyer wants to extend. Seller has a backup offer. What leverage exists here for each side? Well, as stated, because the buyer agreed originally to the 17 days and the seller did not give any extensions, yeah, the buyer, unfortunately, is not going to be able to get the extension. Under no circumstances does the seller have to give any extensions. Okay, they don't. They do it in good faith because they don't want to start over again, but they don't have to give an extension. That's your hard 17 days. Now, this is why I say communication is vital and important, ladies and gentlemen, because when you're in dialogue with the other opposing agent, you may need that time frame to extend. This is why you want to build that rapport with them. Most agents will allow it, but there's some sticklers out there which says, no, hard stop, 17 days, notice to perform. You can't, we're not giving you an extension. And the seller doesn't have to give an extension whatsoever. Okay.
Simon?
So the answer always is in the timelines in the contract. Remember, what was agreed upon in the very beginning. So if you need more time, don't agree to 10 days to release contingency if you know your buyers cannot perform. Then keep it, try to negotiate or try to meet somewhere in the middle from 10 to 17 days that is doable and reasonable, because you don't want to be caught in a particular circumstance that you're now in a rabbit hole where you're having a hard time, and now you're forced to a cancellation.
Simon, can I ask
Yes.
a question? The question would be, and I believe you've already answered this, so that the buyer wants an extension on whatever. He wants an extension on the loan, like you mentioned here. So at that point in time, can you counter with, we'll give you an extension of these days if after that point in time you remove all contingencies? Anything along those lines?
Absolutely. Yeah. The beautiful thing and the dynamics of it is, yes, you can ask for the extension. on anything. It can be an extension of all of the all of the contingencies, or one specific, right? Maybe it's the home HOA, the homeowners association documents, right? That you need extra time because we haven't received it, or you haven't received it, right? You can ask for that extension, right? But again, the problem here is if either party do not grant the extension, then unfortunately there's nothing in the contract that allows that extension to occur without mutual agreement. It has to be agreed by all parties. And if they do agree it, then yes, you're perfectly fine to get that extension. And that goes both sides, ladies and gentlemen, buyer and seller, right? Buyer may be asking for an extension, or the seller may be asking for an extension. The buyer doesn't have to give the seller any time extra necessary to perform. So it's one of those situations where communication and obviously kind of bending a little bit to make this work, because no one wants to start over again. Okay, you work so hard, you're almost at the finish line. Why isn't the buyer giving that extension is beyond me, but that's where you educate your clients. I hope that kind of clarifies your question.
Yes, thank you.
All right, a couple more slides and we are done. Systems to top producers use, right? So transaction timeline spreadsheet, right? Having something that you can use, having a CRM that automatically gives you reminders. Hey, even the simplest thing as your Google Calendar, right? Put a reminder, offer accepted, 1, 2, 3, 17 days is here, send an alarm, put it on your phone. Hey, 2 days prior, 1 day prior, or on the day we have to release contingencies, something that you can keep yourself on track, right? Escrow coordination checklist, weekly file audits, right? Checking your files on a regular basis. Elite agents manage transaction proactively. Weak agents react to crisis, right? So confirm deposit, personally track contingency dates daily, document all conversations, send written follow-ups, avoid verbal-only agreements in writing, use amendments and extensions early, not at the last minute. I think it's pretty all self-explanatory, and it's really just common sense, folks. This is something that I pulled from the actual purchase agreement, right? So it gives you kind of a section of counting days, right? And I think I've pretty much illustrated this, but it gives you kind of a ground, right? That anytime something is accepted or agreed upon, that's always going to be 0 days, right? 0 days, right? We talked about Saturday and Sundays, right? Saturday and Sundays, if a contingency happens to fall on a Saturday, on a Sunday, or on a legal holiday, it reverts to the next business days, right? Or the next calendar days that is now part of the weekends, right? So it gives you kind of a example of how to navigate it, right? And it says the deadline's always at 11:59 p.m., right? So if it's a 30-day escrow, right, and you know that your offer got accepted on the 15th of the month, right? That's considered 0 days. Then the following day on the 16th goes 30 days. Contingencies falling on a Saturday, Sunday revert to releasing that contingency the following business days, right? But the calendar days continue regardless of Saturday, Sundays, or holidays. A 30-day is a 30-day escrow, right? Now, if escrow happens to fall on a Saturday or Sunday or holiday, then that means it's not going to close escrow on those days, because most escrow companies are closed on the weekends. Make sense?
Yeah.
If final day falls on a weekend or holiday, move it to the next business days. Pretty self-explanatory. Okay. And then the last one is your timeline controls everything, right? Leverage, cancellation rights, liability, negotiating strengths, client protection. The contract is not dangerous because of what it is written in it. It's dangerous because agents stop tracking it, right? So track every date, document every conversation, and obviously protect your clients. With that, that's pretty much our class. Let me take a quick look. We have some questions here. Is there something wrong with us? Okay, so better sounds good. Thank you. Yes, Monday, Tuesday. Yes, everything is in calendar dates except the deposit. Yep. And then the RPA, if its scheduled last day for performance falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, after acceptance, performance extends to the next business day. Yep, spot on. Thank you. Well, that's why I get my inspections done within the first 7 days. Absolutely, Thomas. Yep. The faster you get your inspections done, the better position that you have time. If the seller is not performing quickly enough, then it gives you kind of an understanding that, hey, you know what, maybe we need to go in a different direction, right? Don't be that agent that waits to the very end of it. Freddie Mac Underwriter Systems is now renamed Loan Product Advisory. Okay, good to know. Get those HOA documents when you get the listing agreement signed. Absolutely. Especially if you're the listing agent with a condo, make sure you're getting the seller to get those documents ASAP, right? Because those sometimes takes weeks. And time of the essence, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. I usually put the loan contingency at 21 days. Yeah, you know what? At one point, loan contingency was actually 21 days. And then they reverted it to now 17 days. But yeah, you know what? If it sticks and your seller, listing agent agrees to it, then congratulations. Now you have 21 days as an example. And that goes with all contingencies as well. Just because it says 17 days doesn't mean it has to be 17 days. Does that make sense? And then absolutely get a transaction coordinator. It's a lifesaver, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, question.
Simon, not a question, but kind of a comment. A lot of people don't realize that once escrow closes, still has to record. So I always suggest to plan the recording on a Thursday, so escrow can actually close on a Friday and give the keys, so the buyer doesn't have to pay interest for 2 or 3 days and not being able to occupy the home.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about that, ladies and gentlemen, is you can also do a straight 30 days, or you can actually put a specific date saying that, okay, I'm going to calculate 30 days, but 30 days falls on a Monday. You may want to push it till like a Thursday, right? As an example. That way, as he says, right, the escrow officer has time to do what they need to do, because they're going to need at least one day to get everything when it officially records, right? But then it also falls within the weekend too, that most people try to start doing their moving during the weekend as well. So just kind of be mindful of that. But I hope today's class was educational. It is recorded, so it'll be uploaded to our Share YouTube channel. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If there's no additional questions, I appreciate you all. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being here. Enjoy your weekend and go out there and crush it. So with that,
thanks so much, Simon.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.